All right, welcome to the Janus Project. Today on the Jordan Peterson episodes, as we go through this is an article from a few years ago, but man, it could have been written in preparation for his new book. One of the major chapters in his new book, Beyond Order, is a whole chapter on marriage. And if I could summarize the chapter, it's the idea of committing to your marriage to the point where you're willing to fight for it. I really love a YouTube video I just watched. It's linked in this article and in the YouTube video, he talks about this idea that if we approach marriage with the idea that we have an out or we have a way of running away and getting out of it, we won't fight for it. We'll actually back off. The fights aren't worth it. If you think about, let's say you're in a temp job and something just really rubs you the wrong way and you don't really need the job, you may be likely to not even bother fighting. You might just walk out the door and say, whatever. But if you're in a career that you have built and you are, 30 years into this thing, or you plan to be in this thing for the next 30, 40 years, you better believe that you're willing to take on a few challenges, maybe make a few arguments. And that's kind of his point with marriage, where he says, if you're going to be in this thing for the next 50 or 60 years, man, you better be willing to have a few fights. And the chapter starts off, he's a clinical psychologist, so he's been doing a lot of counseling with people and just kind of working through their problems. And those include relationship issues, business issues, even just psychological issues. And so he relates these events kind of in general, where you have a lot of people who will sit down into his clinical practice and their marriage will be on the rocks, and he'll give them the advice to basically say, go out and go on a date. And he says if it's really, really bad off, they'll fold their arms, they'll scoff, they'll roll their eyes, they'll get all upset. And he said the thing that's difficult about marriage counseling is he's often seen as the enemy, because they want out or they don't like each other, and he's forcing them to be around each other. But I want you to think about marriage and the power that marriage has, because what it is marriage is a commitment. It is as he points out, it is a taking on of responsibility. You don't have a choice anymore in the matter. That's the way it should be. Our culture allows divorce way too easily. Really, this idea of no fault divorce. Like I can almost understand the divorce or at least the separation that's there because of abuse or something like that. But in that case, someone should be going to jail. But when it comes down to I don't like this person anymore, we don't talk anymore, they had an affair, he gets into all of that because he basically says there is a level of when the relationship starts to fall apart. Some people don't fight for it so that they can basically be the martyr. And they can basically chalk it up and say, well, I mean, they went and they had an affair on me. And it's like, well, what were you doing to preserve that marriage? Were you having physical intimacy? Were you talking, 90 minutes a week? Were you putting the effort in? Well, I mean, I gave them their space. And it's like, well, you're playing the martyr card. That's what you're doing. You weren't committed to seeing this relationship through. You sat on the sidelines and watched it fall apart, and you did nothing about it. And then you wanted to be able to blame the other person. And that's kind of where he goes with it. Obviously, he's not quite that blunt, but he gets into it with the first major aspect, which is go on dates. And I found this one really fascinating because he'll talk about the idea. He says if you're going to be married for the next 60 years, which you made a marriage commitment, you made a vow, you said you were going to be faithful, and so if you're sticking with this person, then you better hope that it's going to be an enjoyable time. It's not going to be a miserable event that you're just going to have to suffer through for the rest of your life. And he recounts a story of this old woman who was clipping her husband's nails as he basically was in the end of life care home. And he's like, as she's clipping his fingernails, she's cutting all the way down to the quick, and his fingers are bleeding, and he's just looking at that resentment and that bitterness that is exemplified by the woman who is basically torturing her husband as he dies. And he's like, how do you get to that point? How do you get to that point of miserableness? You didn't divorce, but man, you just took it out on him as he died. And he didn't know the whole story. But he talks about these people who he challenged to go on a date, and he said it's almost like they come back, happy that they spoiled his plan, and so he'll send them out on another date, another date, another date. And he says, you got to work at it. You got to be willing to put the time and the effort in to work at it, because this isn't natural anymore. And there would be some people who'd be like, wow, we don't need to date anymore because we're already married. And that's something you do before you're married. He's like, no, you got to keep doing that. And he's like, think about, and we'll get into this in a future video, but he's like, think about the amount of work that someone does when they have an affair. Think about the money that they spend and the secrets and the plans and all of the scheming behind the scenes that they do and the meeting up in secret and all of that. And he's like, how come you don't do that with your spouse? How come you don't do all this stuff, preparing and actually working at the intimacy? Why are you willing to do it with someone else but not with your spouse? And he just brings up this really important fact, because the point is, you're willing to do it with someone else because you don't have to carry any of their baggage. You can abandon them whenever you want to, but you can't do that with your spouse. And so again, really, really important facts. And so he's kind of digging into that idea of like, put the time in, make the marriage work, no matter how miserable it's going to be for the first, 10, 20, 30 dates. He's like, anything that you're trying to get good at, you're going to absolutely stink at for the first, 100 times. Get good at it. And that's what you have to do. And so I think there's a level of, we have to commit to this topic. We have to commit to this relationship. And you need to be willing to do the work to put in. Now, he has a lot of practical guidance, a lot of really, really good stuff here. This is an article I'm going to link to you if you want to read it. It's really, really good. And as he talks about this guy himself got into Jordan Peterson through the whole Kathy Newman thing, which I've referenced in a previous video. But as he talks about it, I like this right here. He talks about the shackles of marriage. He says, what do you do when you get married? You take someone who's just as useless and horrible as you are. Then you shackle yourselves to them. And then you say, we're not running away no matter what happens. If you can run away, you can't tell each other the truth. If you don't have someone around that can't run away, then you can't tell them the truth. If you can leave, then you don't have to tell each other the truth. It's as simple as that, because you can just leave. And then you don't have anyone to tell the truth to. And so that's the idea of, if you are permanently married to this person, you might as well tell them the truth. And that's just a big point there. Another one of his rules from 12 Rules for Life is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And I think that plays in really importantly here. He goes on, he says, you want to be free, really? Really? So you can't predict anything? Is that what you're after? He demands. He goes on, he says, it's a vow. It says, look, I know your trouble, me too, so we won't leave, no matter what happens. And that's why you take it in front of a bunch of people. That's why it's supposed to be a sacred act. What's the alternative? Everything is mutable and changeable at any moment. Keep your vows, right? Many call marriage a form of voluntary enslavement, Peterson says, but really, it's an adoption of responsibility. And so again, that's this really, really important part. And so I think if you were going to pick up the book and read any chapter, especially if your marriage is on the rocks or you're struggling to relate with your spouse. I know my wife and I sat down, and well, we sat down in a car, so I guess you were still sitting. We listened through the chapter, and so I've listened through the chapter twice. It was really, really good. He has a lot of good advice, and so I would advise you, get the book, or at least get that chapter, and give it a read. There's some really good videos. So this one right here, The Real Reason for Marriage, is a really good video on YouTube if you want to follow up on this topic. But hey guys, thank you for joining me on the Janus Project. This is just a slightly different take on it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this article. And if you've been reading 12 Rules for Life, please let me know how it is in the comments. Let me know what you think. I did finish up Beyond Order, and I am enjoying going back over and reviewing some of this material for the channel. Guys, if you would, please like this video, subscribe, share it with a friend, share it with someone who you think might need the help, or even just someone who you think would be helped by it, even in the long run. Anyway, guys, hope this was a help to you guys, and I will see you next time on the Janus Project.